Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Larry Rolla. What's up, Larry?
Hi, Bill.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
You look good. You look good.
Thank you. I couldn't be better.
You're not dyeing your hair, are you?
No, not yet. No, just for men for me. It's all natural.
No, you look good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I got to ask you a question. I was going through YouTube, a lot of the podcasts, and there was a guy on there that had the same name. I forget what it is. It's Staxx. Some big, I don't know if he's Spanish or whatever, full of tattoos, and
big muscle guy, right?
Yeah. He has the same. It's called Staxx World or something like that. And I watched him for a while this morning. Pretty entertaining guy, big guy, loaded with tattoos all over his arms, and he was exposing some guy. I don't know who it was, but I checked him out because that's what I do now. So ever since I'm getting a little used to this podcast stuff, he had a lot of subscribers, and he must be pretty popular. I guess I never saw him before, but what
spells it different?
Staxx.
X. Yeah, I got two X's in my name.
Yeah. So did you ever see him before?
Yeah, his name's Joey Staxx.
Yeah. Well, whatever. He was talking about something. Talks an awful lot and nonstop. So I guess he's good at this stuff. I'm not. I stumble and dribble and everything. Anyway, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, I want to talk about something different that we haven't talked about yet. There's a lot. We talked about the racing. We talked about the mob a little bit.
I'll tell you what I'd like to talk about, only because I just left a situation where a very good friend of mine, and this is the third time this week that it happened. A very good friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer, and terrible, terrible thing. Young person. And I don't even know if I ever mentioned this on the 2 or 3 podcasts we did together about Dr. Burton and my history with him and what I went through with him. And it's pretty informative, but it gets completely away from the mob and the racing and everything else. It was just a part of my life from the 70s into the mid 80s, where I had this relationship with him. We wind up saving a tremendous amount of cancer patients that were given up for dead by the doctors here in the States. And unless you have something else you want to talk about, I'd like to talk about that just as something that's informative for your listeners that might have this situation, that be involved with a family member or somebody that was diagnosed with cancer. It's a terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people lately getting diagnosed. It seems like more younger people are getting
between the air, the pollution, the water, and everything else. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I always felt, and I still do, that it's genetics. But geez, there's an awful lot of people now that years ago when I was involved, and I was heavily involved. I mean, as far as I had congressional hearings, I had a congressional hearing that I formed with Guy Molinari, I think he was a senator, a congressman from Staten Island. And we had a congressional hearing that lasted 3 days trying to get Dr. Burton into this country. And naturally, the government promised and then lied, which caused the American Cancer Institute and all them private cancer organizations to get richer and richer and richer, and more and more cancer patients dying. And at the time, I took it kind of personal because my cousin, who I grew up with, was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given less than 3 months to live. And that's how I started this whole crusade that I got on for a while. and it was very interesting. I mean, we were on all the TV shows, and I was responsible for getting 60 Minutes down there, and I even brought Steve McQueen down there, the actor, and you know, one of Dean Martin's personal friends. And it was an interesting time. I mentioned that story in my book, that the series of events that happened, but I'm not sure if I ever spoke about it on your show. And if you want to talk about that, which is completely different than everything that you're doing, which is wonderful, because you're handling, your content is great. It's all over the place. It's not only just one thing. One week you have, and I'm impressed by how you get in touch with these people. In fact, yesterday when we spoke, I says, how the hell did you get to that guy? But, you know, like you said, you do it 20 hours a day. You do a lot of work at it, and good for you. I hope it works. And I don't know if you want to talk about that movie thing that you mentioned, but you're getting there. So that's good for you. So if you want to talk about Dr. Burton, I'll fill you in from the beginning, how I got involved. If you want to talk about mob stuff, we'll talk about that. If you want to talk about race fixing, we'll talk about that. If you want to talk about whatever, I don't care.
We could start with the doctor. How do you even come about for that?
Well, what happened was in the early 60s, I got involved with a guy called Davy Handel, and we became partners on a couple of horses. And now this goes from the middle 60s all the way up until the middle 80s. So it's them years we'll be talking about. And what happened was he came to me one day and he said, Larry, he says, would you mind if the purse money that we're winning, we take a portion of it and help a good friend of mine he's a doctor, he's a scientist, and what he did at that time was he was working for, I believe Stone, I don't know, one of the cancer organizations. And these cancer organizations, they're all privately owned. And they have little vignettes all over the country with maybe 4 or 5 scientists, doctors, everybody in there trying to find a cure for cancer. And one day, he ran across this Dr. Burton, and I'm talking about Lawrence Burton. He ran across 2 twins, 2 identical twins, identical in every way, and identical twins have the same identical DNA. And one had terminal cancer, and they were young kids. One had terminal cancer and the other one did not. And I'll skim right through this thing. I won't get into all the particulars. I'll make it simple where anybody can understand it. So what he did was he extracted blood from both the kids, and he found that the kid that did not have cancer had a protein in the blood. I think they call it a protein, but we'll call it a protein in the blood that the one that his brother did not have. So he isolated this protein, he extracted this protein from the blood, and he injected into a malignant tumor in one of the mice that he had. And within minutes, the tumor just disappeared. So that was the beginning of it. So without going through all the trials and everything else that it took him about a year to do, he finally came up with a formula by testing blood of cancer patients and learning the proper amount of this particular protein to put into the injection to build up the immune system. And that's all this did, was build up the immune system, take a weakened immune system and build it like Superman strong. And that your own immune system would kill the cancer wherever it was in the body, and with absolutely no side effects. In fact, it makes you feel a whole lot younger. So anyway, what he did was once a year they have these seminars, and with all the doctors and scientists and everything, and he got on stage as a representative of one of the cancer institutes that he was working for. And he talked about it a little bit, and he had 3 mice in cages right on stage. And while he was talking, he says, you know, this is what I come up with. And as he was injecting the tumors in the mice, and as he was speaking, the tumors were shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And then he invited any doctor in the audience to come up. He had all the things there, and they cut them open, and the tumors were all gone. So after that, it was very, very, very impressive. And naturally, this is all documented. It's all true. And so after it was over, the people that he worked for, the private organization that he worked for, which might have been the Cancer Institute, I don't know, I don't remember. They said, okay, what, you know, give us all your paperwork and everything else. And he said to them that he would not, unless he headed this whole new
research. Yeah, the research on
yeah,
it. So.
If he headed it, he was not going to give his all his research papers over. And they said, you have to, because you work for us. So whatever you do. And they were basically right. And the reason he gave was that he didn't want to do it because he worked very hard on this for years and years and years. And he saw too many promising treatments that were just given to you and swept under the rug. And it wasn't hard to assume that because you're a cancer organization, if you figure out that grass would cure cancer, you'd probably eliminate all the grass from the earth. So they barred him. They fired him and barred him, and he was out of work. So my friend,
he's not in this country though, right? He's not in the country.
No, at this time, he was still in the country. So when he got fired and everything, his good friend Davey Handel, who was my partners with the horses, he says to me, he told me the whole story. And he says, listen, why don't we take some of the purse money that we're winning and help my friend out? He lost his job. So we bought him a home out on Long Island, bought him all the material and equipment he needed, meaning all the stuff that you had to do with blood and all the whatever machinery, all the up-to-date, state-of-the-art stuff he needed, plus a bunch of cages and 1 million mice and everything he needed, we gave him. Okay, so then while this was happening, he was really perfecting he would draw blood from you, and he was buying blood. I believe he was, and I could be wrong, I don't know where he got the blood, but I guess he was buying it from the blood banks or whatever. And he was extracting just this protein out. Naturally, he would analyze the blood because there was a bit of a problem when the AIDS thing first started. So he was checking all the blood, and all the blood that was clean, he was extracting this one particular protein out, and he had it stockpiled. He would freeze it and everything. And then he would check your blood, and he could tell if you have cancer, when you're going to get it, where you're going to get it. He had such a sophisticated system, testing system, that he could tell everything. So, and if you had cancer, he would be able to tell how strong the cancer, how much cancer you had, and he had developed a system where he would know exactly how much of this protein to inject. So he just used a little bit, a needle, like maybe maybe a small 3 cc syringe, and he would inject this into you in the morning at 7 o'clock, and at 7 o'clock every morning he would check your blood and give you a shot, and then another shot at 7 o'clock at night. So that's how it works. So during this time, while he was experimenting and perfecting everything, we made a deal with the Bahamian government so he could start treating patients, because he was not allowed to treat patients in the United States here. Nobody even knew about it except a handful of people, me, Davey, and a couple of friends, and a couple of Dr. Burton's friends. But he now had this system that was curing, that could cure people.